welcome to the 12th and final episode of Project Mouse. In the last episode, you'll have seen my efforts at painting and weathering the mouse. Despite my earlier misgivings, the finish is growing on me and I'm getting much happier with the result. I'll be more objective when it's mounted on its base and is in context. In this episode, you'll see my attempt to recreate the scene of the mouse at the testing facility, where it chewed up the granite cobbles on the road outside, as you can see from this period photo. I wanted something tough to build the groundwork on, that wasn't going to flex with the weight of the mouse. I decided to go for a plastic I've used before called Tufnol, which is both strong and very rigid. Tufnol is made from layers of paper, cotton or glass fibre cloth, which are dipped into a resin or varnish, and then strongly bonded together under pressure in a hot press, so I figured it would be ideal. Because the surface is smooth, I knew it would have to be keyed up so that the texturing didn't fall off. I did a couple of tests with some offcuts. One was smooth, the other I textured with my Dremel. The result was as expected. I needed to key up the surface, otherwise the texturing wasn't going to stick. So I ordered a sheet of 4mm Tufnol and cut it to size. I then used an angle grinder to texture it up. It would have taken forever with a Dremel, and I'm not that patient. This turned out to be a disaster. The texturing caused the Tufnol sheet to warp, and there was no way I could straighten it out, so it was back to the drawing board. Fortunately, after scratching around in the garage, I found a sheet of 6mm MDF with a facing on both sides. I keyed this up with the angle grinder and it stayed flat, so I was back in business. The edges of the MDF were very porous, so I gave them a few coats of PVA and sanded them down to make sure they were well sealed. Next I added a Milliput Wall around the edge to retain the texturing when I poured it in. This would allow me to have a flat base right to the edge. After filing and sanding down the Milliput, I keyed it up with a drill just to make sure the texturing wasn't going to come loose. I then sprayed the Milliput and MDF edges matte black with a rattle can. I didn't bother with primer. The finish came out really well, clean and crisp. I added 2 strips of styrene for the mouse to sit on while I bedded it into the texturing and keyed this up as well. Being a bit heavier than a plastic model, it was a precaution I had to take. Now for my experimental texturing technique. I decided to go for polyfiller. As it's readily available, it'll definitely stick to my base and it doesn't shrink. I figured adding some ballast to it would give it some texture, so I used a mix of fine grey and brown granite. I didn't want any chipped edges to show up white, so I thought why not add some cheap acrylic paint. It's water-based, so there isn't much that can go wrong. Once I'd found a big enough container, I could start mixing the ingredients. I started with the polyfiller, then added a mix of the 2 shades of ballast. I then added a couple of dollops of the acrylic paint before pouring in the water. Immediately I could see that the black paint had darkened everything considerably, and the ballast disappeared almost completely. Fortunately, adding more polyfiller did lighten the mix up a bit. It was surprising just how much I needed to mix up. Now to pour it onto the base. The mix is about the consistency of cement and looks pretty similar. I spread it around the base with a large spatula, making sure to get it right up to the edges. I added a couple of mounds to the side of the base where the mouse would have piled up the gravel turning on the spot. To bed the mouse in, I laid a sheet of cling film over the surface and gently lowered it into place. This seemed to work pretty well, but there was none of the ballast texture visible on the surface. So, while the base was still wet, I sprinkled a heavy layer of ballast over the mix and laid down another sheet of cling film. I gently patted down the ballast into the surface and then added the mouse again. And here's the base after 24 hours. Some of the ballast was still a little loose, so I went over it with some diluted PVA glue with a drop of detergent to lock it all into place. Now to recreate the cobblestones. In real life they're 100mm granite cubes, which works out to be about 4mm in mouse scale. I decided to give polymer clay a try. It's pre-coloured and hardens in an oven. My plan is to roll out the clay using two 4mm strips as guides, cut it up into cubes and then cure it in the oven. And here's the first batch, ready to cure. This was a bit tedious, as the more I handled the clay, the softer it got, but I developed a system eventually. Okay, 30 minutes at 110 degrees C. Let's see what we get. Sorry for the interruption, but while that's cooking, I'd like to take a break and ask you to subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoy watching my projects as much as I enjoy making them. I'm the only person producing all these models and videos, and your subscription really means a lot to me. Thanks for watching and subscribing. Sorry about the music. Now, let's get back to the mouse. I'm calling that a win. They're a bit irregular and some are bigger than others, but I reckon they'll do the job just fine. Now to glue them onto the base. I decided to go for straight lines, no fancy patterns, and stuck them down with superglue. I had to finish the edge with Milliput dummy stones and respray the black, but I reckon the result is pretty effective. Also on the base I'm adding a figure to give a sense of scale to the mouse. This will be Ferdinand Porsche. I started sculpting him back in episode 9, and now he's finished, with the final details being added in Milliput. This is my first attempt at figure painting, and I decided to go with enamels. The clothing came out well, but I wasn't happy with the face, and decided to repaint it with acrylics. There are plenty of expert figure painters out there. I have an awful lot to learn. I'll do better next time. With the paints out, I added some washes and dry brushing to the base, as well as fitting Ferdinand into position. The base came out way better than I'd expected, but I wanted to mount the mouse on a plinth to really set it off. I contacted Allwood Products, who make the bases for my aircraft, and asked them if they'd make a custom base for me. They were really helpful, and a few weeks later a very heavy, well-wrapped delivery arrived. This base is just as heavy as the mouse and is solid MDF. Allwood sprayed it satin black and it has a terrific finish. The reason the base is deep is because I wanted to add a title to it. I designed the mouse letters in my CAD software and set them up for 3D printing. They came out well, but I didn't want plastic letters on my base. So I made some cold cure silicone moulds and cast them in pewter. You can see more about this process in my how-to video series. These are the rough castings of the letters. The finish isn't bad, but after some careful filing and adding some pins in the back, they look great and are ready to attach to the mouse base. There was a lot of careful measuring, marking and drilling to fit these letters on. This marks the end of Project Mouse. Let's see how it finally looks. When I started Project Mouse, I had a lot of unanswered questions. How would I make it able to support its own weight? How would I attach the suspension? How would the upper hull fit over the tracks? And many, many more. It's been a long project, and I've learned a lot over the past months. I've made a few mistakes, resolved problems, discovered new techniques, and had a great time on the way. I now have a healthy respect for those incredible model makers out there who produce fantastic models and have some serious skills. The best way to improve is to keep practicing, hopefully getting better with each model. which I fully intend to do. My advice for anyone wanting to experiment and build something out of the ordinary is simple. Do it. It's a lot of fun problem solving and learning new skills and techniques. Start with something simple, and then as your confidence grows, try something more challenging. Sure, things can go wrong, but that's part of the process. You may discover a better way. Don't be afraid to try, and at the end you'll have the satisfaction that you've created something unique and can be proud of what you've achieved. I'm very happy with how the mouse has turned out, and shall be using what I've learned on my next project, Project Stug. I hope you found Project Mouse interesting and enjoyed seeing the progress. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel to see more of my projects. If you have any questions about Project Mouse, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.